These are selected scenes from the 70-minute-long Roadster Body Part 1 DVD. Check out all the Covell DVDs at covell.biz. This is the body of a 1927 Ford Roadster, and I've loved this body style for years. I'm going to make one of these bodies out of aluminum, and one of the first steps I'll take is to make a buck. A buck is a template or a framework that captures all of the contours of the body and all of the edges. And the material I'm going to use to make the buck from is MDF. MDF stands for medium density fiberboard. This is a material much like particle board, but it's lighter and it doesn't dull cutting tools the way that particle board does. Once this material is cut and sanded, you can make a very smooth surface and it can hold very crisp edges. So I'll lay out a piece of tape right in the center. I've got a few little bumps to go over that makes it a little bit tricky, but that's about the position of the first station. So I'll move over about 6 inches, and this is where the next station will go. So that's the location of the horizontal stations. And one of the reasons I like using tape to lay these out is it's very easy to just pull the tape back, straighten out the position, and then stick it back into place. And I'll be fine-tuning all of these a little bit, but the tape is a great way to give us a starting point. All the pieces are tack welded together, and I've removed all the clecos, so this structure can come off the body now. And I think at this point you can appreciate that this is really a fast way to capture all the information we need about the contours and edges of the whole body side, and we'll use this information to build the buck from. I've used several different thicknesses of material, some 1/4 inch, some 3/4 inch, and here's a stack of 2 pieces of 1/4 inch, and then there's several layers of full thickness 3/4 inch material. And I sized these so they fit that gap just as closely as I can make it fit. And you might wonder how I cut these curves. Well, using the same template we used to cut the top edge of the turtle deck pieces, I use that same template to cut both the outer curve and the inner curve. And how did I know the width to make? Well, later on I'm going to be rounding the corners of this turtle deck to match the original, and I need to have enough material height so that when I round the corner it doesn't get too thin anywhere. So the next step is to actually glue these parts together. I'll spread glue on these surfaces and then drive screws to the first layer. Then I'll put glue on the next surface and hold that into place with screws. Do that again with the third surface, and then we start building up the tapered thicknesses of these parts until we fill this gap nicely, and then the last step will be to screw and glue the outer piece into place. And that's what's going to be coming up next. The masking tape gives me a nice high contrast target to shoot for as I'm doing the sanding. So I need to sand a 45-degree chamfer that touches the tape on both sides. I've done just a little touch-up sanding on this part, and now I'm completely happy with the contours everywhere. So this part of the buck for the turtle deck side is completed. Now, using the same information I used to make this buck, the contour templates that go along the length and the contour templates for the radius across this direction, I flipped those over to make a mirror image, and I've also created the buck for the other side of the turtle deck. So now that these are completed, I'm going to move on to the next step, which is making the buck that fits beneath the deck lid, and this is the portion that will connect this side of the turtle deck to the other side. All of the stations have been cut oversized. I'm going to fit them into place and then use this template to mark the contour on each one. And the next thing I want to do is to join this part to this part. I'm going to use 2 screws that go through this station and go into the turtle deck side. With the first 4 pieces of the buck for the turtle deck put together, it's really starting to look like something. But there's this big hole in the middle where the deck lid goes. And I don't have an original deck lid to model from, so I'll show you the process to generate the contours of this buck. You'll notice the stations are farther apart on this buck, and there's a reason for that. Because this is a larger panel and it's a low crown panel, we only need to have the station spaced like they are here. So let's try this into place to make sure it fits. So it should be a nice snug fit inside the perimeter. I'll push it up toward the top and nestle it down. And now I can check the fit all the way around. We want to have a perfect fit, and it looks excellent. So this is a milestone. The buck for the turtle deck is finished, and we can move on to the next step. With the firewall in place and the turtle deck buck in place, I placed the template between them, and the template shows the shapes of everything in between. Now the rest of the buck is going to be comprised of three main sections: the cowl, the door area, and the quarter panel. Let's look at the cowl first. There are elements here that define the contours of the cowl top, and elements here that define the contours of the cowl side. All of these stations need to attach to something. So what I'm envisioning is basically a box, two flat sides and a flat top, that all of these stations will attach to. So the three elements of the box are put together, and my first intention was to cut this piece flush with this element, and after looking at it I thought, you know, I can leave this long and this will become one of the stations, so we'll save a step in doing that. So the next step after this is I'm going to use that sheet metal template and lay out the position of each of the stations, and I'll draw lines on these in line with where the stations will need to go. So the stations are all put in place now, and they're all oversized. I've also cut the backing pieces that define the plane of the dashboard and define the rear edge of the door opening. I've trimmed the contour on the dash panel and the door edge panel, so now it's time to lay out the cuts on all of the stations. So I'm going to use this contour gauge to capture the shape from the template. So I'll just push this into place. Then I'll transfer this contour gauge onto the station of the buck and mark the edge with a felt tip marker. So there's our mark for trimming, and using the same technique I'll transfer all the contours off our template onto the station, trim each station, and that should complete the work on the cowl portion of the buck. I've cut all the stations slightly oversized, and I'll trim them later, and you can see the layout lines I've used to position the stations. So just about always I want the stations to be flat, but there's an exception at the top of this panel. This panel has a curve, and you really can't curve MDF. It just doesn't lend itself to that. So to accommodate the curve, I've glued together 3 thicknesses of MDF, and once the glue has set, I'll bandsaw a curve into this and sand it smooth. And you'll see how that will take on the curve we need for the top of this buck. So this is going to be my own car, and I'm really looking forward to the next steps in the process. I plan a series of DVDs that will show the construction of the aluminum body to fit the buck, and I'm looking forward to getting into the next production. Thank you, and until next time, this is Ron Covell signing off. Learn metalworking and welding from a master. Covell DVDs, the standard of the industry.